It started, as most things do, with a whisper. Not a literal whisper, but the kind that settles into your bones, a quiet certainty that this was it. Liam. He was everything I thought I wanted, everything I truly believed I deserved after years of wading through the murky waters of almosts and never quites. We met at a mutual friend's low-key birthday gathering, the kind where everyone's a little too comfortable, a little too tipsy, and the conversation flows as easily as the cheap rose. He had this laugh, deep and resonant, that made my chest vibrate even from across the room. And those eyes, they were the color of warm honey, always crinkling at the corners when he smiled, which was often. He was a software engineer, ambitious but not cutthroat, with a passion for obscure indie films and a surprisingly tender way with my notoriously grumpy cat, Mittens. Our first date was coffee, which turned into lunch, which bled into an impromptu gallery visit, and before I knew it, 6 hours had vanished like smoke. It felt effortless, like finding the missing piece of a puzzle I hadn't even realized was incomplete. He listened, truly listened, to my rambling anecdotes about my marketing job, my dreams of opening a small, artisanal bakery someday, my ridiculous fear of heights. And he remembered. He'd bring up a throwaway comment I'd made weeks ago, a small detail about my childhood, making me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced before. It was intoxicating. We moved in together after 8 months. 8 months. People said it was fast, but it felt right. Our little apartment, a sun-drenched 2-bedroom in the heart of the city, quickly became our sanctuary. We painted the living room a calming sage green, argued playfully over which side of the bed was truly mine. It was always the left, because I liked being closer to the window, and built a life out of shared mornings, late-night talks, and the comforting rhythm of routine. He'd make me coffee every morning, just the way I liked it, black, no sugar, a splash of oat milk, and leave it on my nightstand before he headed to his home office. I'd pick up his dry cleaning, remind him about his mother's birthday, and make sure there was always fresh fruit in the fridge, because he was terrible at remembering to buy it. We were a team, a well-oiled machine, navigating the small complexities of daily life with a harmony that felt almost preordained. Our weekends were a blend of lazy lions, exploring new cafes, and the occasional hike in the nearby state park, where he'd patiently wait for me to catch my breath at the top, always offering his hand. He'd talk about our future, casually weaving in phrases like "when we get a house" or "when we have kids," and my heart would swell with a quiet, profound joy. I saw us growing old together, our hands still intertwined, our laughter still echoing in a home filled with warmth and memories. He was my anchor, my confidant, my best friend. Or so I believed. The first tremor, barely perceptible, came disguised as a compliment. We were at a work happy hour for my company, and I was buzzing. I'd just landed a significant new client, a huge win for my team, and I was feeling on top of the world. Liam, ever the charming partner, was mingling effortlessly, his smile lighting up the room. When he finally made his way over to me, wrapping an arm around my waist, I leaned into his warmth. "You were really on fire tonight, babe," he murmured, his lips brushing my ear. So articulate, so confident. "It's almost like I don't recognize you." The words, meant to be praise, landed oddly. "Almost like I don't recognize you." It was a strange turn of phrase, a subtle implication that this confident, articulate version of me was somehow new, somehow different from the real me he knew. I brushed it off, attributing it to the alcohol and the celebratory mood, but a tiny, almost imperceptible prickle of unease settled in my stomach. It was the first time I felt a disconnect between the person I was and the person he seemed to perceive. A few weeks later, we were discussing our finances, something we did regularly, transparently. I was proud of my savings. The result of years of careful budgeting and a recent bonus. I suggested we look into a joint investment account for our future, maybe even start saving for that down payment he always talked about. He nodded, but his expression was unreadable. "You know, Clara," he said, his voice soft, almost paternal, "you're so good with the creative stuff, the big ideas. But maybe leave the heavy lifting, the real financial strategy, to me. I've got more experience in that area. It's just a different kind of brain, you know? He patted my hand, a gesture meant to be reassuring, but it felt patronizing. My creative brain versus his financial strategy brain. It was a subtle dismissal, a quiet undermining of my capabilities, wrapped in a veneer of concern. I felt a familiar prickle of unease, but again, I pushed it down. He was just trying to help, right? He was looking out for us. He always said he wanted to take care of me. The microaggressions continued, tiny cuts that, individually, seemed insignificant, but together, began to bleed. He'd interrupt me mid-sentence at social gatherings, not maliciously, but with an air of knowing better, of having the more important point to make. If I expressed an opinion on a topic he considered his domain, technology, politics, even the best way to load the dishwasher, he'd offer a gentle correction, a well, actually. That subtly invalidated my perspective. He'd often preface his advice with, "You're so sweet, Clara, but sometimes you're a little naive about how the world works." Or, "It's cute how you think that, but in reality." Each time, I'd feel a flicker of defensiveness, a quiet voice in my head questioning why my thoughts or feelings needed his validation or correction. But then he'd follow it up with a loving gesture, a tender kiss, a thoughtful gift, and the doubt would recede, replaced by the familiar comfort of our connection. He was just being Liam, I told myself. He was just being himself. He was direct, he was smart, he was protective. These were the qualities I'd initially found so endearing, so comforting. He was strong where I felt soft, decisive where I sometimes hesitated. I saw it as a complementary dynamic, a perfect balance. He'd often tell me how much he admired my empathy, my kindness, my ability to see the good in everyone. "You're too good for this world, Clara," he'd say, pulling me into a hug, "and that's why I need to protect you." It felt good to be protected, to have someone strong looking out for me. It felt safe. I clung to that feeling, even as the small, unsettling moments accumulated, like dust motes gathering in a sunbeam, only visible when the light hit just right. I was so deeply in love, so invested in the narrative we had built, that I actively resisted any thought that might disrupt it. My internal monologue became a constant negotiation. He didn't mean it that way. He's just stressed. I'm overthinking it. He loves me. The gaslighting, when it started, was insidious. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic declaration that I was crazy, but a slow, steady erosion of my reality. I'd bring up a conversation we'd had, a promise he'd made, and he'd look at me with genuine confusion. "I don't remember saying that, babe. Are you sure you're not mixing things up?" Or, sometimes your memory plays tricks on you when you're tired. He'd never accused me directly, but the implication was clear. My perception was flawed, my memory unreliable. Once, I found a receipt for an expensive watch in his jacket pocket, a brand he'd never worn and couldn't really afford. When I asked him about it, casually, he looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "A watch? What watch?" "Oh, that must be for a client. A gift. For closing that big deal." He'd then change the subject so smoothly, so effortlessly, that I'd feel foolish for even bringing it up. He was so convincing, so earnest in his denial, that I started to second-guess myself. Was I imagining things? Was I being paranoid? My self-doubt, once a quiet hum, began to amplify. I started writing things down, little notes on my phone, just to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. Liam said he'd call the plumber today. Liam promised to help me with that presentation. But even then, I'd sometimes delete them, ashamed of my own distrust. He was so good at making me feel like the problem, like my anxieties were a burden on our perfect relationship. He'd turn my concerns into an attack on his character, making me apologize for even having the thought. "It hurts me, Clara, that you would think I'd ever lie to you," he'd say, his voice laced with disappointment, and I'd immediately feel a surge of guilt. He was so good at playing the victim, at making me feel like the villain for simply questioning him. The financial manipulation became more overt, yet still cloaked in his protective guise. He started managing more of our joint expenses, insisting it was more efficient. He'd handle the rent, the utilities, the internet, and I'd transfer my half to him. But then, he'd subtly imply that my contributions weren't quite enough, or that my spending habits were a little frivolous. "You know, if you cut back on those fancy coffees, we could put more towards that house," he'd say, even though I rarely bought coffee out and my savings were substantial. He'd praise my work ethic, but then add, "It's just a shame your industry doesn't pay as well as mine, otherwise we'd be set." He made me feel like my financial contributions were secondary, less important, even though I was pulling my weight and then some. He'd often forget to pay a bill, leaving it for me to discover and scramble to fix, then apologize profusely, blaming his busy work schedule. It was always an innocent oversight, never malicious. But it chipped away at my sense of security, making me feel dependent on him, even though I had my own stable job and a healthy bank account. He was slowly, imperceptibly, taking control, making me feel like I needed him to navigate the complexities of adult life, even the ones I was perfectly capable of handling myself. He'd even started making comments about my clothes, my hair, my general appearance. "That dress is a bit much for a casual dinner, don't you think? Or you look tired, maybe you should try that new serum." It wasn't outright criticism, but a constant stream of suggestions, subtle hints that I wasn't quite good enough, not quite polished enough, not quite his ideal. I found myself second-guessing every outfit, every makeup choice, every decision, always wondering if it would meet his unspoken approval. The isolation began subtly, too. He'd gently discourage me from spending too much time with certain friends, especially those who were more outspoken or independent. "They're a bit negative, aren't they, Clara? I just want you to be around people who lift you up." Or, if I made plans, he'd often suggest an alternative, something just the two of us, making me feel guilty if I chose my friends over him. "I just miss you when you're not around, that's all," he'd say, his eyes full of feigned vulnerability, and I'd melt, canceling plans to be with him. My world, once expansive and filled with various social circles, began to shrink, centering almost entirely around him. Our apartment, once a sanctuary, started to feel like a gilded cage. I was so consumed by trying to be the perfect partner, by trying to appease his unspoken expectations, that I lost touch with parts of myself. I stopped pursuing my baking dreams, telling myself I didn't have the time, when in reality, I just didn't have the energy or the confidence anymore. His subtle criticisms had chipped away at my self-esteem, leaving me feeling smaller, less capable, less vibrant. I was a shadow of my former self, a quieter, more anxious version of Clara, constantly seeking his approval, constantly trying to anticipate his moods. The nagging feeling persisted, a dull ache beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life, but I was too afraid to acknowledge it, too afraid to shatter the illusion. I was so deeply entangled, so emotionally invested, that the thought of untangling myself felt like tearing off a limb. The turning point, the true beginning of the end, came on his 30th birthday. I had been planning it for months, a surprise party at our favorite rooftop bar, inviting all his friends. His family, even a few of his colleagues. I'd booked a private section, arranged for a custom cake in the shape of a vintage camera. He was a photography enthusiast, and even managed to get his favorite indie band to play a short set. I'd poured my heart, my time, and a significant chunk of my savings into making it perfect. This was going to be a celebration of him, of us, of the life we were building. I was so excited, so full of anticipation, that I could barely contain myself. I'd even bought him a special gift, a vintage Leica lens he'd been coveting for years, something I'd saved up for meticulously, knowing how much it meant to him. I envisioned his face, lighting up with surprise and joy, his arms wrapping around me in a grateful hug. I'd even considered using the moment to subtly hint at something bigger, something more permanent, maybe a quiet mention about our future, a subtle nudge towards the next chapter. The air was electric with anticipation. I arrived at the bar early, overseeing the final touches, making sure everything was just right. The band was setting up, the cake was chilling, and the first guests were starting to arrive, their faces alight with conspiratorial smiles. I felt a surge of warmth, a deep satisfaction that I was doing this for the man I loved, the man who was supposed to be my future. He arrived precisely on time, led in by his best friend, Mark, who had done an excellent job of keeping him distracted. The moment he walked through the door, a collective surprise erupted, and the room filled with cheers and applause. Liam, for a split second, looked genuinely shocked, then his face broke into that familiar, honey-eyed smile. He hugged his friends, his family, accepting their well wishes, and then his gaze found mine across the crowded room. My heart fluttered. This was it. This was our moment. I started to walk towards him, a wide smile on my face, the words of love and celebration already forming on my lips. But then, he did something unexpected. He didn't walk towards me. Instead, he turned, his arm sweeping around the waist of a woman I didn't recognize, a stunning blonde with an impossibly perfect smile. She was wearing a dress that looked suspiciously like the one I'd admired in a boutique window just last week, a dress I'd decided against because it was too much. He pulled her close, his hand resting intimately on her lower back, and leaned in to whisper something in her ear. She giggled, a bright, tinkling sound that cut through the celebratory noise like a shard of glass. My smile faltered. The room, which had moments ago been filled with warmth and joy, suddenly felt cold, the air thick with an unspoken tension. My friends, who had been watching me, exchanged confused glances. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. Who was she? Why was he holding her like that? Why was he introducing her to his family first? A cold dread began to spread through my veins. He finally detached himself from her, and walked towards me, his smile still plastered on his face, but his eyes were different now, a little too bright, a little too distant. "Clara," he said, his voice unnaturally loud over the music, "I need to talk to you. Now." He didn't wait for my response, simply took my arm and pulled me towards a quieter corner of the rooftop, near the edge, overlooking the glittering city lights. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I tried to pull my arm away, to ask him what was going on, but he held firm. The blonde woman was watching us, her perfect smile now a smirk, a knowing look in her eyes that made my blood run cold. "What is it, Liam?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a desperate plea for reassurance. He took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the city, avoiding my eyes. "Clara, this isn't easy to say, especially tonight. But, this isn't working. We're not working." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My world tilted. "What are you talking about?" I managed, my voice cracking. "What isn't working?" We're celebrating your birthday. I planned all of this for you." I gestured wildly around the party, the band, the cake, the smiling faces of our friends. He finally looked at me, his honey eyes now devoid of warmth, cold and hard. "I'm breaking up with you, Clara. I've met someone else." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant murmur of the party, the faint strains of the band. I stared at him, my mind struggling to comprehend. Someone else? Here? Now? On his 30th birthday, the party I had meticulously planned, the party where I was supposed to be his partner, his future? My gaze flickered to the blonde woman, who was now openly staring at us, a smug expression on her face. It clicked. She wasn't just someone else. She was the someone else. The humiliation washed over me, hot and stinging, then a wave of icy shock. You brought her here?" I choked out, the the words tasting like ash. To your party? The one I threw for you? He shifted uncomfortably, finally looking away. It's not like that, Clara. She just happened to be here. A blatant lie. She was dressed for the occasion, perfectly coiffed, clearly a guest. His eyes darted nervously. Look, it's over. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. I need someone who understands me, someone who's on my level. On my level. The words echoed in my ears, a cruel mockery of every time he'd subtly undermined me, every time he'd made me feel less than. The creative brain versus the financial strategy brain. The sweet, naive Clara versus the real world. It was all a setup, a slow, deliberate dismantling of my self-worth, designed to make this moment of public humiliation even more devastating. My vision blurred, tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. Not in front of her. I felt a primal scream building in my chest, but no sound escaped. My entire body was trembling, a violent tremor that started in my hands and spread through my limbs. The party, the music, the laughter, it all faded into a dull roar, a background noise to the utter devastation unfolding within me. I looked at Liam, truly looked at him, and for the first time I saw not the charming, loving man I thought I knew, but a stranger. A cold, calculating stranger. His eyes, once so warm, were now devoid of any genuine emotion, only a flicker of impatience. I think it's best if you just leave, he said, his voice low, almost a dismissal. I'll have Mark help you get your things from the apartment tomorrow. My things. Not our things. Not our apartment. Just my things. As if I was a temporary guest, an inconvenience to be removed. The finality of it, the utter disregard for everything we had built, hit me like a physical blow. My breath hitched. I wanted to scream, to rage, to demand answers, to tear down the carefully constructed facade of his perfect birthday party. But something stopped me. A flicker of dignity, a tiny ember of self-preservation that refused to let him see me completely shattered. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to stand tall, to meet his gaze, even as my world crumbled around me. I said nothing, just turned on my heel and walked away, past the bewildered faces of our friends, past the smirking blonde, past the cake, past the band, past the life I thought was mine. Each step was an effort, my legs feeling like lead, but I kept going, refusing to look back, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I don't remember leaving the bar. I don't remember hailing a cab. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the middle of our living room, the sage green walls mocking me with their false sense of calm. The apartment, once filled with our laughter and shared dreams, now felt cold, empty, a hollow shell. Mittens, sensing my distress, rubbed against my legs, purring, but even her comfort felt distant. I sank onto the sofa, the one we'd picked out together, and the dam finally broke. Tears streamed down my face, hot and relentless, blurring my vision until the room dissolved into a watery mess. It wasn't just the breakup, it was the public humiliation, the callousness of his timing, the blatant disrespect. It was the realization that everything I thought was real, everything I had invested in, was a lie. He had not only betrayed me, but he had done so in the cruelest, most calculated way possible, designed to shatter me completely. I replayed the scene in my head, over and over, each detail a fresh stab to the heart, his cold eyes, the blonde smirk, his dismissive tone. I need someone who's on my level. The words echoed, twisting the knife. He had been subtly chipping away at my confidence, making me feel small, so that when he finally delivered the blow, I would be too weak to fight back, too broken to question. He had groomed me for this moment, meticulously, patiently. The realization was sickening. The next few days were a blur of tears, anger, and a profound sense of disorientation. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned friends, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of my life. Mark, Liam's best friend, was the only one who managed to break through. He showed up at the apartment with a bag of groceries and a quiet, sympathetic demeanor. "He's a bastard, Clara," he said, his voice rough with anger. I tried to talk him out of it. I told him it was messed up to do it like that. Mark, who had always seemed so loyal to Liam, looked genuinely distressed. He told me Liam had been seeing the blonde woman, her name was Serena, for months. He'd met her through a networking event for his company. "He was talking about you like you were a placeholder," Mark admitted, his voice low. "Saying you were sweet but not ambitious enough, not connected enough for his future plans. Not ambitious enough. Not connected enough." The words hit me with a fresh wave of nausea. All his subtle criticisms, all his gaslighting, all his financial manipulations, they weren't just about control, they were about systematically devaluing me, making me believe I was less, so he could justify his betrayal. Mark also mentioned something about Liam's new business venture with Serena's family, a vague but apparently lucrative opportunity that had suddenly materialized. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't just about love, it was about ambition, about social climbing, about money. I was just a stepping stone. The anger, when it finally hit, was a cleansing fire. It burned away the tears, the self-pity, the lingering doubt. I was no longer just heartbroken, I was furious. Furious at Liam for his deception, furious at myself for being so blind, so naive. I started going through our shared documents, our bank statements, the files on our joint cloud drive. I needed answers. I needed to understand the full extent of his betrayal. What I found was a slow, horrifying unraveling of his carefully constructed facade. The joint investment account he'd been managing? It was real, but he'd been siphoning off funds, small amounts at first, then larger sums, into an offshore account I didn't recognize. The client gift watch? It was for Serena. I found a picture of her wearing it on her public Instagram, tagged with a gushing caption about her amazing, thoughtful man. The business venture Mark mentioned? It was a real estate development project, and Liam had been using my savings, the money I'd meticulously built for our future, as his initial investment, without my knowledge or consent. He'd forged my signature on a few documents, small, innocuous-looking forms that gave him access to certain funds. He had systematically drained my financial resources, all while making me feel like I was the one being irresponsible. The realization was a punch to the gut. He hadn't just broken my heart, he had stolen my future. The betrayal was deeper, more calculated than I could have ever imagined. He hadn't just cheated on me emotionally and physically, he had financially exploited me, systematically dismantling my security for his own gain. The charming, protective man I loved was a con artist, a predator, meticulously planning his escape while I was busy planning his birthday party. The humiliation burned hotter than ever. Not only had he dumped me publicly, but he had done so after stealing from me, after using me as a stepping stone for his own ambition. The thought of him and Serena, laughing at my expense, mocking my naivete while spending my money, made my blood boil. But the anger was empowering. It replaced the paralyzing grief with a fierce determination. I wasn't going to be a victim. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I started documenting everything, screenshots of Serena's Instagram, copies of the suspicious bank statements, the forged documents. I consulted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn who listened patiently to my rambling, tearful account, her expression hardening with each new detail. "This is more than just a breakup, Clara," she said, her voice firm. "This is fraud. This is theft. And we're going to make him pay." Her words were a balm to my raw nerves, a promise of justice that I desperately craved. The process of rebuilding was slow, painful, but ultimately empowering. I moved out of the apartment, finding a small, cozy place across town. It was a fresh start, a space untainted by his presence. I cut off all contact with Liam, blocking him on every platform, refusing to answer his increasingly frantic calls and texts. He tried to spin a new narrative, claiming I was overreacting, that he'd made a mistake and wanted to talk things through. But I saw through it now. It was another attempt at manipulation, another desperate plea to regain control. I leaned heavily on my friends, especially Mark, who became an unexpected ally. He helped me move, listened to my endless rants, and even offered to testify if needed. He admitted Liam had always been a little shady with money, but he'd never imagined it would go this far. My colleagues at work were incredibly supportive, giving me space when I needed it, and cheering me on when I started to regain my focus. I threw myself into my job, channeling my anger and pain into productivity. I started seeing a therapist, a kind, insightful woman who helped me untangle the web of gaslighting and manipulation, helping me reclaim my sense of reality. She helped me understand that his actions were a reflection of his character, not mine. I wasn't naive, I was trusting. I wasn't weak, I was loving. The confrontation, when it came, was not a dramatic courtroom scene, but something far more satisfying. Evelyn had gathered all the evidence, building an airtight case. We had enough to pursue legal action, to expose him publicly, to potentially ruin his career and his new business venture with Serena's family. But Evelyn, with her shrewd understanding of human nature, suggested an alternative. A private meeting, with a clear ultimatum. We scheduled it for a neutral location, a sterile conference room in Evelyn's office building. Liam walked in, looking confident, almost smug, with Serena by his side, her perfect smile faltering slightly when she saw me. He clearly expected a tearful plea, a desperate attempt to win him back. But he was met with a calm, composed woman, armed with facts and a steely resolve. Evelyn laid out the evidence, piece by piece, the forged documents, the bank statements, the screenshots. Liam's face slowly drained of color. Serena, initially defiant, grew increasingly pale, her eyes darting between Liam and Evelyn, a dawning horror in her expression. The silence in the room was thick with tension, broken only by the rustle of papers. Liam tried to deny it, to gaslight, to spin another narrative. "This is all a misunderstanding, Clara. You're blowing this out of proportion. I was going to pay you back. It was just a temporary loan." But Evelyn cut him off, her voice sharp and unyielding. "Mr. Davies, we have irrefutable proof of fraud, theft, and emotional distress. We have witnesses to your public humiliation of Ms. Miller. We can take this to court, expose you to your investors, your family, your new partner's family. Or, you can agree to our terms." She presented him with a settlement agreement, full repayment of all the stolen funds, plus a significant amount for emotional damages, all within 48 hours. And a legally binding non-disclosure agreement, preventing him from ever contacting me again or speaking negatively about me. The alternative was a public lawsuit, a media circus, and the complete destruction of his carefully crafted image. He looked at Serena, who was now staring at him with a mixture of disgust and fear. Her amazing, thoughtful man was a fraudster. The lucrative business venture was built on stolen money. The perfect life she thought she was stepping into was a house of cards. The realization hit her hard. The look on Serena's face was the sweetest revenge. The perfect smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of shock and betrayal. She turned on Liam, her voice rising in a furious whisper. "You told me you were financially secure. You told me you were building this for us. You used her money?" Liam, cornered and exposed, finally crumbled. He stammered, tried to explain, but his words were hollow, his charm gone. He was just a pathetic, desperate man caught in his own web of lies. He signed the agreement, his hand shaking, his eyes avoiding mine. The money was transferred within 24 hours. It wasn't just about the money, though that was important. It was about the acknowledgement, the validation, the undeniable proof that I wasn't crazy, I wasn't naive, and I wasn't the problem. He was. The public justice came in a different form. Serena, humiliated and enraged, didn't keep quiet. Her social media, once filled with gushing posts about Liam, suddenly went dark. Then, a few weeks later, a cryptic but unmistakable post appeared: "Some people build their dreams on the backs of others. Be careful who you trust." It wasn't a direct accusation, but it was enough. The whispers started. His business venture quietly dissolved. His reputation, once pristine, began to unravel. Life after Liam was a slow, deliberate process of rediscovery. The initial anger eventually subsided, replaced by a quiet sense of peace and an unshakable resolve. I started taking baking classes, something I'd always dreamed of but had put aside. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from, their unwavering support a comforting balm. I learned to trust my instincts again, to listen to that quiet voice inside me that had tried to warn me all along. I was no longer the naive, trusting woman who had fallen for a charming lie. I was stronger, wiser, and fiercely protective of my own peace. I learned that true strength wasn't about being protected by someone else, but about protecting myself. I learned that love shouldn't diminish you, but amplify you. The scars remained, faint but visible, a reminder of the lessons learned. But they weren't wounds anymore, they were badges of resilience. I was still Clara, but a new, improved version, polished by fire, tempered by pain, and ready to face the world, not with fear, but with an open heart and a clear mind. The echo of his promise, once a comforting lullaby, was now a distant, hollow sound, replaced by the vibrant symphony of my own reclaimed life. I was finally free, truly free, and the future, once a terrifying unknown, now stretched before me, bright with possibility. I finally felt like myself again, only better. The healing wasn't linear, of course. There were days when the memories would resurface, sharp and painful, like shards of glass. I'd see a couple holding hands, or hear a song that reminded me of our song, and a wave of sadness would wash over me. But these moments became less frequent, less intense. I learned to acknowledge the pain, to sit with it, and then to let it go. I realized that grieving the relationship wasn't just about grieving Liam, but grieving the future I thought I had, the person I thought he was. And once I allowed myself to fully grieve that loss, I could truly begin to move forward. I started dating again, cautiously at first, but with a newfound clarity. I paid attention to red flags, no matter how small. I listened to my gut. I prioritized my own well-being and boundaries. I learned to articulate my needs and expectations, and to walk away from anything that felt less than authentic. It was a revelation. The fear of being alone, which Liam had subtly cultivated within me, had vanished. I discovered a profound sense of self-sufficiency, a quiet confidence that came from knowing I could rely on myself, that I was enough, just as I was. One evening, months later, I was out with friends at a new restaurant. Laughing, sharing stories, genuinely enjoying myself. My phone buzzed with a notification, a LinkedIn request. It was from Liam. My heart gave a small, involuntary lurch, but it wasn't fear or sadness. It was a flicker of amusement. He was trying to reconnect, to gauge my reaction, perhaps to see if I was still broken. I looked at his profile picture, the same charming smile, the same honey eyes, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no longing, no pain. Just a quiet indifference. I declined the request, then blocked him. It was a small act, but it felt incredibly significant. It was a final, definitive closure, a symbolic severing of the last thread that connected us. He was a ghost from a past life, a lesson learned, a chapter closed. My focus was on the present, on the vibrant, messy, beautiful life I was building for myself. I had my career, my friends, my passion for baking, and a newfound appreciation for my own strength. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to write it, on my own terms. The bakery dream, once a distant whisper, began to take shape. I started developing recipes, experimenting with flavors, and sharing my creations with friends, who encouraged me relentlessly. I even started looking into small commercial spaces, researching business plans, and connecting with local food entrepreneurs. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and completely mine. There were still moments of doubt, of course, the familiar anxieties creeping in, but now I had the tools to manage them. I had learned to trust my judgment, to rely on my own resilience, and to seek support from the right people. Liam's betrayal, as devastating as it had been, had inadvertently become a catalyst for my growth. It had forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities, to dismantle the illusions I had built around a false love, and to discover the fierce, capable woman who had been hiding beneath layers of self-doubt. It was a painful education, but one that ultimately set me free. I was no longer defined by a relationship, or by a man's perception of me. I was defined by my own strength, my own choices, and my own unwavering belief in myself. The final piece of the puzzle, the true catharsis, came unexpectedly. I was volunteering at a local charity event, serving baked goods, my own, of course, when I saw him. Liam. He was with a different woman this time, looking a little older, a little less polished, his charming smile a touch too forced. He saw me, and for a split second, his eyes widened in surprise, then quickly darted away. He looked uncomfortable, almost ashamed. He didn't approach me. He didn't try to make eye contact. He just kept his head down, pulling the woman he was with away, disappearing into the crowd. And in that moment, I felt nothing but pity. The man who had once held so much power over me, who had caused me so much pain, was now just a fleeting shadow, a reminder of a past I had transcended. He was still playing the same games, still trying to project an image that wasn't real, still trapped in his own cycle of deception. But I was free. I was thriving. I was surrounded by genuine warmth and connection, building a life rooted in authenticity and self-respect. The justice wasn't just in the legal settlement or the social whispers, it was in my own unwavering peace, my own profound sense of self-worth. It was in the quiet knowledge that I had not only survived, but flourished. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, and turned back to my friends, to my life, to my future, which was now brighter than I could have ever imagined. The echo of a promise, once broken, had transformed into the vibrant melody of my own triumphant song.